Again, what a beautiful and amazing start to the day that we've had. I'd like just to remind you as we go into our first panel discussion, for those who have been asking, the PowerPoint presentations will be made available. And also remember that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording of the webinar will be uploaded onto the ILO webpage. So you can certainly access this webinar again. And a quick reminder, if you've just joined us now as well, that the translation icon is at the bottom of your screen, and you can certainly choose the language of your preference so that you are a part of this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now for us to go into our first panel discussion, which is titled Investing in Skills Development in ICT. Now, the context of this panel is that we know that with rapid developments in ICT, many countries, as we've heard in the opening remarks, are facing skills shortages of ICT specialists. And so in this panel discussion, we're going to be focusing on views on the kind and the level of skills that are lacking and how we might begin to address these issues. And in particular, we're going to focus on the efforts of employers and workers' organizations. I'd like to take this moment to quickly introduce my panelists. And maybe as I introduce them, my panelists could put their cameras on so that we can just have a sense of who they are. So Madame Alexandra Kutain, she's a senior director looking after research and policy in the Information and Communications Technology Council in Canada. If you can please wave to us, Alexandra, so we've got a good sense of who you are. Fantastic. And she leads and oversees all activities of the digital think tank by the ICTC. Thank you very much for making the time to join us. You're also seeing on screen Mr. Patrick Tay. He is an Assistant Secretary General of the Singapore National Trades Union Congress, or the NTUC, based of course in Singapore. He comes with an incredible resume. I will only just add that he is also an elected member of Parliament, and he currently chairs the Government Parliamentary Committee for Education and chairs and sub-chairs other committees as well. Mr. Tay, thank you for making the time to join us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tori Harukawa, who is the Director of the Policy Making Department, this in the Federation of Information and Communication Technology Service Workers of Japan. And if we can, there we go. So that's Mr. Harukawa joining us. Sir, thank you for making the time to join us. He's also served as an executive committee member of the KDDI Workers Union West Japan branch. Last but certainly not least in this conversation, we have Mr. Naotaka Same, who joins us. He is a Senior Director of the Human Resource Development Division. This is part of the Global HR Management Unit for Fujitsu. He's also head of Fujitsu University, and he's been a professional in the HR and learning and development arena for decades. Mr. Same, thank you for making the time to join us as well. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have an incredible lineup in terms of our panelists that are going to be speaking. But before they start speaking, I want to hear your voice, and I want to get a sense of from you. What do you think of this particular question? So we're going to go into a poll, and I'm going to invite the technical team to please launch the poll so that we can all participate. So what you can see on your screen now is a poll, and the question is, which of the following skills are not receiving sufficient attention at higher education institutions? Do you believe that it's 1, technical skills, 2, soft skills, so communication, etc.? Is it 3, interdisciplinary skills, or is it 4, entrepreneurial skills? So all you need to do is make your selection. So I'm going to make my selection too. Make your selection, and once you have done that, please press the submit button. My panelists, you can participate as well. We'd love to get your views on this poll. And once you've submitted, I am going to get a reading now from the team to give me a sense of the 260 of us on this webinar, what are our overall thoughts? So technical team, I'm ready for the results. if you could project those back up so we can see what we think the skills not receiving sufficient attention are. So there you have it, some interesting numbers. 45% of us, almost half, think that the biggest lack in attention is in entrepreneurial skills. We think only 12% of us believe it's technical skills. There is about 25%, about a quarter, is saying, well, maybe we need to be focusing on the soft skills more, and interdisciplinary skills. Interestingly, one of the points that was raised in the keynote address by Dr. Dool, coming in at 18%. So to my panelists, I think I'd like you to keep these numbers in mind, because I'd love to hear your comments on that. Okay, so with that, I can invite all my panelists to switch off their cameras. And I'm going to ask Alexandra to keep her camera on, because I'm going to come to her with the very first question. So Mr. Tay, Mr. Harukawa, you can switch your cameras off for me as well. And of course, to our global audience, this is an opportunity for you to really give me some of your comments and your questions so that I can put them to the panel. Now, Alexandra, perhaps what you can do for us is start off by sharing a little bit about the focus of the ICTC and some of the initiatives of the council. And the question I'd like to bring to you is, how does the ICTC support the skills needs of ICT companies? Over to you.
Excellent, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining today. So I think to really answer the question, I have to provide a bit of a background on what the ICTC actually is. So we were started about 30 years ago by the federal government of Canada. And the whole purpose of our being put together as an organization was really to investigate the labor market needs and skill needs of the very early information and communications technology sector in Canada. Well, over the last 30 years, a lot has changed. So since then, ICTC has become independent of the government, and we're really split into two pieces of the organization. The first is the digital think tank, and the second is capacity building. In the digital think tank, we're very much focused on providing timely and evidence-based research on various pieces related to the digital economy. So not even just the ICT sector anymore. We're increasingly looking at how traditional sectors of the economy are intersecting or colliding with the ICT sector. This can have implications for sectors including agriculture, for example, natural resources, interactive and digital media, healthcare, and many, many more. So we provide labor market intelligence, including an understanding of which jobs are in demand, what skills are needed for those jobs, labor market forecasting, skills mapping, and also we do additional research on various items related to the overall economy, like investment, trade, education, technological impacts, and social impacts of technology. What's really unique about ICTC, and I think the way that it really supports business in Canada to develop and grow their talent base, is that we also have the capacity building side of the organization, which takes our research that we've done on various issues and creates programs. Some of these programs include youth programs that provide training and upskilling opportunities for youth to become engaged in the tech sector, opportunities for women to engage in tech, opportunities for newcomers who are coming to Canada to be able to obtain a job in the tech sector, and other types of training, including even building cybersecurity skills for students in high school. So the way that really we support the overall industry in Canada and the ICT sector in particular is by providing that evidence-based research that can help them create plans or help develop HR tools or learning resources. And ultimately, this helps them prepare for what the future may look like. In the time of COVID-19, where so many things are in flux in the global economy, not just in the Canadian economy, this access to relevant and timely data is more and more important. And the other way that we do it is combining our research with an actual program, so an actual deliverable. And I'll just quickly go over an example of the way that we've done this in the past by speaking to a study that we did a couple of years ago on the Calgary ecosystem. So Calgary is one of Canada's largest cities, but what happened in Calgary is that it was highly dominated by the oil and gas sector. So when we saw a slump in the oil and gas sector, unfortunately, this led to a lot of people being displaced from the labor market. A lot of these people were also very highly skilled engineers. So we actually were in a situation where we have a lot of highly skilled people who were not working, but could contribute quite a bit to several other sectors of the economy, including the ICT sector. So in this study, we really investigated what jobs were in demand in the city's ICT sector, what skills were needed for those jobs. And the really unique thing that we did is we actually mapped the skills that were relevant from the workers that were displaced. So this includes electrical engineers, petroleum engineers, several other types of occupations. And we tried to understand what the skill matches and skill gaps were between those that were displaced and the in-demand jobs in ICT. And this was so successful that ultimately we created a sort of a boot camp, which was a mini training program to actually provide the skills necessary for those workers to obtain employment in the ICT sector. So in a nutshell, I think these are the main ways in which ICTC helps to really inform the overall business sector in Canada and try to help them retain and obtain the workers that they need to succeed.
Alexandra, I think that's a fantastic start in terms of the contribution to that panel. I also would want to acknowledge some of the comments that are coming through, and a comment from Michael from NIU saying, you know, the biggest challenge is really the mismatch between the most important problem solving skills and versus what the industry is looking for. So what is coming out of the institutions and what the industry is looking for. And it's interesting to see how think tanks like those within the ICTC are really trying to make sure that that gap and that bridge is closed. Natalia, I'm also glad to see that your question around inclusion has been addressed on the chat function. So let me move on then to Mr. Patrick Tay, if you will, and maybe Patrick, if you can come back to us. The question that I'd like to bring to you is, what role does NTUC play in ensuring that its members are active participants in the digital economy? And can you in particular share some specific activities of the NTUC in this regard?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad to see so many participants tuning in to this today's webinar. I think this is a very important, in fact, the question you brought up earlier is very, very important. I mean, the skills mismatch and how we can better connect the workforce to the in-demand jobs and the new jobs. So I will use this opportunity in the next couple of minutes to share some of the things we are doing in Singapore, in particular from the union perspective, how we have been partnering the tripartite partners, i.e. the government and employers and the regulators, to drive this important area of strengthening the ICT talent and meeting the new jobs of the future, in the future of work. First and foremost, I think in the last couple of years in Singapore, we have been spending a lot of energies, resources, capital in not just infrastructure, but also in developing skills and the entire industry and manpower in this space. We have this Smart Nation initiative, which is a whole of government and a whole of country approach to get everyone up to speed. I think, you know, the last 7 months of COVID-19 pandemic has kind of sped up and accelerated many of our efforts in helping businesses, companies, unions, including workers and you know, everyone here in Singapore to embrace tech, to get used to a low-touch economy, and of course, get ready for the next normal. So I think we have been spending quite a lot of energies into this, and we are starting to see some of these bear fruit. Next slide. And in Singapore, we have, although we have a small, rather small population of slightly less than 6 million, but we have actually quite a big manpower pool in the ICT space, the Infocom technology space, something more than about 140,000 and still growing. In fact, in the last couple of years, we have seen an exponential growth in demand for ICT talent. At the same time, a growth for ICT talents coming up from our institutions of higher learning, coming up from our polytechnics from school. So I think besides fresh entrants, we have been putting a lot of energies in trying to help mid-career workers, because in Singapore, we are facing an aging population challenge, and therefore getting not just fresh new people into this industry, fresh school leavers, but also mid-career ones in sunset industries to move into this space and to grab new opportunities. And this sector also sees quite a number of gig workers as well, what we call those on contract for service or independent contractors. Next slide. And we have done quite a bit of surveys in the last year or so in this space through our various partners and unions. In fact, the union that looks after the ICT space, there's one newly formed one, we call the Tech Talent Assembly. it's a union where there are many of these freelancers in the tech space. So traditionally, unions can't mobilize or look after freelance workers. So we actually created this association, which is affiliated to the National Trades Union Congress in Singapore, to be able to look after the interests, welfare, and needs of this group of workers and professionals in the ICT space. So in fact, when we did surveys and a whole series of surveys, we see, including surveys with small and medium enterprises, large local enterprises, and multinationals, I think there's an increase in job vacancies in certain areas or certain job expertise. For example, IT consultants, DevOps experts, cloud engineers, data analysts, as well as solution architects and cybersecurity engineers. I think this is not new. I think many of the findings across the globe have showed that these are the in-demand skills or jobs that are sprouting out. Likewise, those traditional ones like tech support, hardware engineers, infrastructure engineer, and digital marketing, although you see in my slide it says decrease, but I would say it's relative. There are still vacancies, but of course fewer in the next couple of years as they get filled up in the last couple of years. Next slide. Here you are. I think very important. I think this slide kind of encapsulates some of the key skills that are in demand. We have done quite a very, very deep survey into the space, interviewing employers, businesses, companies, including government agencies, including workers in general, and of course, supervisors and hiring managers. And these are some of the things that they're looking for. I think earlier on, one of the attendees shared about the mismatch of skills. I think I totally agree with that. I think the key challenge now is that we have these to be able to flesh out some of the in-demand skills, in-demand jobs, and at the same time also fill up the gaps through coming out with new training to segue the workers either because of unemployment, retrenchments, or looking at the new opportunities to move into these sectors. So these are some of the growth areas and growth and the skills that are in demand. I think essentially I would so-called divide them into two key areas: the technical and technological skills, as well as adaptive skills. Technological skills can see, there is a whole list of skills that are really in demand now in the market. You can scan through LinkedIn as well as the various survey indicators will reveal that these are the top technological as well as technical skills that are in demand. But at the same time, we also noticed that a lot of adaptive skills are required. Particularly with COVID-19, many industries, businesses, including workers, had to pivot, transform, and redesign the work that they do. So I think these are some of the in-demand adaptive skills, besides being able to communicate, of course, knowing business knowledge, as well as being able to solve complex problems and design thinking. And interestingly, I think one key observation is that relevant work experience seems to come up quite a bit. I think to employers, they are looking at relevant work experience. And I'm not talking about just purely ICT work experience, but work in adjacent industries. I think increasingly, we are trying to get a lot of mid-career workers, particularly in Singapore, to segue into this growth sector and growth areas in the ICT space, simply because there are really a lot of demand for such skills and talent. At the same time, also, we see opportunities because many of those mid-career who are in this space have already amounted a lot of experience and domain expertise. So we're trying to encourage them to pick up some of these skills and to move into the ICT space. Last slide. So these are some of the skills initiatives. You can find out more online. These slides will be circulated, but you can do a Google search and they are available online to help mid-career workers, fresh graduates, as well as those already in the industry to keep up with the new skills and demand. Because I think the half-life of skills these days is about 5 years. So I think it's even shorter and faster now. So I think that's some of the ways where we can keep workers really relevant and resilient. And finally, I talked about TTAB. You can find out more. This is our Association of ICT Professionals, where which are affiliated to the trade union, and then where we better look after and organize workers in this sector. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Again, a fantastic response. And some of the emphasis that you make, for example, is on the need for cross-domain skills. You speak about adaptive skills being absolutely important, especially in the environment we find ourselves in. And interestingly, experience in adjacent industries is actually very valuable at this time. So I think those insights are incredible. There was a question that came up in the chat that said, just before you got to the slide on which skills are going to be more in demand and which are going to be less in demand. So I believe that that audience member has been answered, because I think you did a very good job of highlighting that. So fantastic. Thank you, Patrick. So let me now go to Mr. Tori Harukawa. And Mr. Harukawa, the question I'd like to bring to you is, what is the nature of the current challenges of skills shortages and development amongst ICT specialists in Japan? And most importantly, how does ICTJ respond to this particular challenge? Over to you, sir. And if I can ask you to unmute your microphone, please, sir.
Excuse me, sorry, it was on mute. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Haruka from the ICTJ. From my part, I'd like to look at skills development and skill shortages in the ICT sector and what the trade unions are doing. Page 1 of my presentation. So looking at some of the challenges in the IT industry in Japan, first of all. In 2018, METI compiled a report concerning digital transformation, and they came up with the shocking prediction, the cliff of 2025. In this report, it predicted that by 2025, there would be a shortage of 430,000 IT talents. And so therefore, securing sort of advanced IT talent would be an urgent sort of priority. And if we were unable to do this, we would see economic losses to the tune of a maximum of 12 trillion Japanese yen on an annual basis. They really sounded a grave warning. One of the obstacles is that it's the legacy systems. On average, they operate for 21 years, and this is a very high cost. And when looking at IT investment, investment is not being made for new technology, but it's mainly used for maintenance. So this means that when looking at the sort of technological know-how, the IT engineer, it is still stuck in the past. And the investments is not really being geared towards the new development of skills. It is being spent on legacy systems, etc. So we're not really keeping up with development. Also in Japan, securing IT talent and training IT talent across the various industries is also a challenge. And looking at various countries and other countries, in the non-IT companies, the user companies, many IT talents can be found. In contrast, in Japan, about 70% of IT talent is in IT companies, and the business model is contracting out IT services. That means that in the user companies, know-how is not being accumulated, and in carrying out digital transformation, of course, this is a huge obstacle. So therefore, we need to look not just at IT companies, but the user companies, non-IT companies. And we need to create an environment where ICT talent can really be maximized in all companies. Next slide, please. Here, you see an example of some of the measures that we are undertaking at ICTJ. Well, we don't have a unique sort of development scheme as such, but in the trade unions affiliated to us, through dialogue with the employers and workers are together tackling this issue. They're looking at the human development, resource development that is needed to acquire these new skills. There are training courses provided and also economic assistance being provided. As we see more and more competition to secure ICT talent, each company has to strengthen its measures to secure able workers. They need to look at outside of the company and also inside the company and develop their existing employees. A very sort of multifaceted human resource approach is required. And as mentioned earlier, for the realization of digital transformation, user companies also need to be involved. So we need to work across the board with other sectors and trade unions in other sectors also in order to tackle these challenges. Next slide, please. So we are also carrying out measures to make sure that the working environment is an attractive one for IT engineers. First, we are trying to create a enabling sort of working environment. We look at anti-harassment measures, telework, and also diversity, for example, ensuring that that is existing in the workplace. IT workers are often subject to long working hours. And because they're working long, they have very little time to actually upskill and attend training courses. So correcting this long working hour sort of system needs to be tackled, and it's very important. Also, in terms of the other companies, we need to lobby for appropriate business practices for subcontractors also. Through a website, we actually provide advice and also information about the appropriate working environment and appropriate business practices. Also, together with the government and employers organizations as a tripartite sort of structure, we are looking at working style reform and such measures that we need to push forward. We publish guidelines, for example. We look at other measures also. And we want to ensure that there is a sound working environment. And we believe that this will enhance the working environment for the IT engineer and eventually lead to the enhancement of the skills of the ICT sort of talent that we have. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harukawa. Again, some really interesting insights there. You brought to the focus again the cliff of 2025, highlighting that sharp shortage of IT personnel in Japan of 430,000. And of course, the big question is, if it's 430,000 in Japan, how big is the number globally? And also, you've landed on an interesting point that hasn't been touched on in the conversation so far, and that is about on the environment and to what extent that we can improve the working conditions and the environment of IT personnel around the world. I would like to just pick up a comment that is made by Katayun Sapiri in the chat, which I thought was a very good comment. Katayun says, one of the biggest challenges, at least in my country, which is Iran, is that the quality talent is always hired by big companies with very high salaries, and that causes the rate of salary increases to go up. And the impact of that is that startups are then not able to hire good recourse within reasonable salaries. I think it's a fantastic contribution and one of the dynamics that certainly needs attention in the sector. But Mr. Harukawa, thank you for that. Let me then go to Mr. Same to come in now and maybe bring in some of his thoughts. And the question that I'd like to bring to you, Mr. Same, is what is the role of employers associations in responding to skills shortages and development? And how has Fujitsu in particular responded to this challenge? And what good practice can you share with us from your own experience, in particular Fujitsu's experience? Over to you, please.
Thank you,
Nochi. My name is Saime from Fujitsu. So first of all, what I want to mention is that this measure that I'm going to explain is just started in Fujitsu. It's not a sort of success story as such, but it's just an example of what Japanese companies are doing, what they are beginning to do. I want to share the information with you. It's not a success story as such. And of course, if you have any sort of opinions about the measures that we're undertaking that will help us improve our current measures, I'd very much welcome that. So I hope that we can get comments, sort of input, anything from you in terms of input for us that will be useful. Next slide, please. So this is the presentation material that you're using in our management meetings. Evolution to DX, evolution DX human resources and increased productivity. This is what I'm looking at. We have 130,000 employees worldwide. And by 2022, we want them to be able to be competent in a sort of design thinking. So we have actually set up quite a high challenge for ourselves. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can we turn to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what are we doing at Fujitsu? Well, first of all, within our company, we have set up a special organization at Digital College, and we have tried to define what we mean by DX in Fujitsu and how we are going to actually bring this about. We have begun this work as of last year. So what is DX? What does DX mean for us? It is design thinking and data-driven. It's a combination of these two factors as we see it. And how do we actually implement this within the company and throughout the group? I think this is a challenge for many companies because it involves a change in the corporate culture and implies a cultural transformation. So what are we trying to do? Let me give you a concrete example. So in order to change the company, what is needed? Well, I think the top management actually needs to change their thinking also. In order to change the whole company, the president, CEO, and the top management needs to change. So first of all, we need to provide the training to the top management, and we're going to begin this intensive training next month, in fact. After that, president, CEO, and then we want to drop this down to a more sort of general management level. And we want to ensure that this permeates throughout the group. But of course, just doing that, of course, is not going to change things dramatically. So we need to look at the potential leaders, potential future leaders who can lead Fujitsu as a company. And we need to educate them about the design thinking and data-driven approach. We want them to become a catalyst for change, in fact. And we are going to be promoting measures to ensure that this is the case. And to just give you another concrete example, we looked at design thinking. We've defined them according to different levels. What is level 1 of design thinking? What is level 2? We have actually matched that with the various different levels of design thinking with various job descriptions and also the job sort of status. We are currently looking to do this. What will this do? For example, for one job, this kind of skill will be required, and unless you have this skill, you cannot actually get to this job. It might sound a bit harsh, but we're trying to make it very clear what skills, what kind of thinking is required for each job sort of title. And within each of the processes within our work, we want to drop down design thinking and the data-driven approach. We want to actually have a kind of template, if you will, or blueprint that can be used by all our employees. So when an engineer is doing product development, how do they use design thinking and the data-driven approach? Or when drawing up a business sort of plan, what kind of things do people need to have in mind? We want to have a kind of template or a blueprint for this and use it in all our operations. And until now, we were dealing with supercomputers or servers, for example, products that would cause huge problems if it broke down. So for the Tokyo Stock Exchange, for example, we provided mission critical sort of items, and having very high quality was very important. Therefore, in our company, we actually carried out a very thorough sort of process of improvement, and this is our historical background. However, with the advance in digitalization, providing the best experience to our customer, making them happy and enhancing their well-being and creating that with the customer is going to be more important than simply providing high-quality services and high-quality products. We need to be able to respond to such needs also. Having said that, in terms of design thinking, you see here, fail fast. Well, that's easier said than done, really. have to allow for some mistakes, but we can't cause huge problems for our customer. So how do we allow sort of failure as we learn without sort of damaging our customers? This is always going to be another challenge. In any case, in terms of Fujitsu's DNA, we have this thinking that let's give it a try anyway. And I think that this is really being respected. And of course, when thinking about such matters of DX, if we think only amongst ourselves, we can only have a narrow perspective. So we cooperate with other sort of academics, Eric Starman, for example. We receive advice from outside and also experts in terms of design thinking to feed into our own strategy. And one piece of advice that we received is from the professor is that changing the engineering culture is going to be very challenging. It's going to take time and it's going to take commitment. But the professor also pointed out that you should not actually force these changes or DX on your employees. You have to get your employees on board, get them also thinking about the process and make them an active partner in terms of the DX process. This was a valuable advice we received from the professor that we were receiving consulting services from. Next, I'd like to talk about reskilling. So we carried out reskilling for converting conventional sales to business producer. Initially, our business model was based on providing IT infrastructure to our customers. So traditional sales would be looking at the client's IT system, IT people, and try and identify what the IT people in that company wanted and make our proposals based on that. However, with the rapid digitalization of our society, it's not going to be just looking at the needs of the individual company, but how do we digitalize the whole business of our customer? That's going to be ever more important. So if it's a finance company, then fintech is advancing. So over-the-counter services might disappear. Then what kind of services do you want to provide to the customer? That's the kind of proposal that the salespeople, if Fujitsu, need to be able to propose to the customer as a business producer. All the stakeholders need to be involved from upstream to downstream to look at the solutions needed. And what we're trying to do at the moment is to act as a business producer, ensure that Fujitsu employees can facilitate workshops for our customers, for example. We want to provide training to our employees for that. We want to identify sort of staff who can do that and develop them. We are looking to transform about 8,000 sales staff to become business producers. It is also, once again, an ambitious goal. But of course, this also cannot just be done by Fujitsu's efforts alone. We have many customers, and many of our customers demand rapid service, swift service from us. They want an immediate sort of reaction or service provided from us. At the moment, Fujitsu is looking at remote work, for example, and there are customer concerns that perhaps we might not be able to respond as quickly to customer demands. And now I'd like to talk about security master and data scientists. Fostering these type of people is quite difficult in-house, and we are therefore looking to hire from outside the company, paying as much as 30 million Japanese yen in terms of salary. But of course, we want to bolster our in-house resources also, so measures are being undertaken on both fronts. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Same. I think you've done an incredible job of bringing us inside Fujitsu, talking about some of the mindset shifts and changes. You talk about taking top management, but also future leaders into this new mindset and way of thinking. I love the DNA tagline, let's give it a try anyway. And of course, as you're talking about the importance of balancing the reality of creating the space to fail fast and fail forward, whilst at the same time giving your customers the kind of experience that you want them to have. So it's lots of interesting comments. I just want to pick up a quick comment by Mayuko Nakai, who says, you know, how is design thinking defined in job descriptions, in requirements for promotion? I assume that it is quite challenging. So I'm going to maybe get to Mr. Same just to give us, before you switch off your camera, a quick comment in just 30 seconds, Mr. Same. You've brought an interesting idea here, design thinking and a data-driven approach. How difficult is it to make sure that this is integrated into the job description?
それは非常に難しいです。難しいです。
That is a very difficult task indeed. Actually, we are currently looking into what would be the best job description, what would be the wording of the description should be, so that everyone can understand that. And once it's done and once it's concrete, I'd like to share it with you all.
Thank you very much. I think that's an opportunity for somebody in the human capital space to come and partner with you there, Mr. Same. I want to pick up on a few questions. We've got less than 10 minutes together, and I'd like to just come back to some questions. We've got some questions that we've received on email, and of course, there's some questions that have come through on the chat. And so let me, Alexandra, come to you with this question, please. It comes from Caroline in Singapore, and Carolyn is saying, how can universities attract more women into the ICT field? Alexandra, your thoughts on that? How do we attract more women into the ICT field? Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly a challenge that I think is felt across the world. In Canada, for example, we've had about 25% participation of women in the ICT sector, and unfortunately, this hasn't changed over the last 10 years. So it's clear that whatever we've been doing until now hasn't really been working. One thing that I think would really help is to kind of have better collaboration between the post-secondary institutions and actual industry. This might even involve having industry come and teach classes, do guest lectures, really help the students understand what is actually possible once they graduate from their programs. Another thing that I think could attract more women specifically is really showing the possibilities of what is beyond the traditional ICT roles. For example, we're doing a study right now on the creative technology sector in British Columbia, and this includes occupations like visual effects, animation, game design. All of these are really interesting occupations, relatively new, but this is a sector that's really booming in BC, and these companies are responsible for more than 10,000 jobs a year in BC alone. So I think highlighting what the opportunities are beyond, let's say, the traditional software developer or even data scientist in this case is really important to be able to include groups, such as women or even other underrepresented groups as well.
Fantastic, Alexandra. So on the chat function, I've got a thread of a conversation that I'd like to lift. I want to start off by a comment from Nicola Dool, who we heard from earlier. She's saying one of the challenges that is the need to upskill and retrain mid-career and older workers. Their potential tends to be overseen. Although we have seen some good approaches, it would be interesting to get more insights and experiences. And then Masaki Arai also says, in my understanding, employees in Fujitsu are older on average, and in common, it tends to be difficult for older people to change. Don't you feel that it is difficult to change the mind of older people? Patrick, I want to come to you first, because as I was asking the question, I saw you nodding your head vigorously. What are your thoughts? Are older workers and mid-career workers overlooked? And is it generally harder from your view to go through the process of changing mindsets and instilling lifelong learning?
Yeah, I think both in Japan, if I can speak for Japan and Singapore, so we are facing an aging population challenge. So the average age of workers have been moving up, and we do have many of the mid-career workers and the older workers. So, but we also see that, as I shared earlier, we also see many of them have a lot of domain expertise and skills, experience which they bring with them from many of years in working in specific sectors. So as the ICT sector grows, we are trying to segue them to some of these roles based on their experience in the particular industry or sector. But at the same time, also in Singapore, at the tripartite level as well as at the government level, we just rolled out the most recently as part of the COVID-19 response, a jobs growth initiative, JGI for short, jobs growth initiative, to encourage employers to hire mid-career and older workers. So there's actually a significant amount of funding to so-called encourage employers to be more inclusive and also take in many more mature and older workers. So in the last couple of years, we've seen not just so-called wage subvention and subsidy. We're also taking a lead from what's happening in Japan as well. We are also rolling out our re-employment laws in Singapore. So I think we have seen a reasonably good success in getting more mid-career and older workers back into the workforce. So, but of course, now with the COVID-19 challenge, we're trying to work very closely with our tripartite partners to do even better because it's challenging times ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patrick. Mr. Harukawa, I want to come to you with two policy questions, if you will, and I'm going to ask for quick responses because we've got less than 5 minutes. The first question comes from Mira, and Mira wants to know, how can we prevent massive unemployment as a result of digitalization? And in particular, is there a way of reintegrating blue-collar workers into the digital economy? What are your thoughts on that question?
Yes. Under the COVID-19 pandemic, we are looking into the digital economy and what can digital economy do under this pandemic. Well, I think this is a really big challenge and really big theme. So my response includes my personal view as well. So before a massive unemployment, many companies really need to make efforts to adapt to digitalization, and government also need to provide policies and support companies so that companies can adapt to digitalization. So with these supports and subsidies by the government, private companies need to find ways to adapt to digitalization and utilize digital technology in their activities. I think that's what's important first. But in case of unemployment, people who lose their jobs, they can utilize digital technology to try to find work. And for that, I think we need to build a platform so that these unemployed workers can find their jobs again. I think an overall platform and system, overall system for digital economy is necessary.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great response. And a very quick follow-up. I've got a question again here for you, Mr. Harukawa, from Havishan. And Havishan, it says, what would you recommend as potential ways of integrating persons with disabilities into the digital economy?
This question relates to a topic that we are not really working on as our organization, as ICTJ. So this is really my personal response. I think it is possible to understand digital economy, digital society as a new opportunity, and to use and utilize that as an opportunity to employ people who may have not been employed before. People with disabilities can work from home remotely. And for them, in that sense, I think there are increasing and greater opportunity under digital economy.
Thank you very much, and I think it's fantastic that you've, also put forward your personal views. I think all of these are appreciated. Mr. Same, I'm going to close off with you in this conversation. I first want to pick up a question from Carolyn in Singapore to you, saying, how do you attract and keep female ICT specialists in the workforce at Fujitsu?
I think that's a very good question. And one of our executives, female executives, she's in a position of executive vice president now. And she graduated university with a degree of domestic science, domestic economy. She never learned any IT skill. She never touched a computer before, but she's head of ICT business now. So that's, I think, encouraging. And I think we need to show that people as a role model for female employees.
Fantastic, and I think role modeling is certainly one of the ways of attracting more women into the sector. Final question to you, Mr. Same, is when we think about, there's been a lot of talk about partnerships between the private sector and academic institutions to make sure that we are getting the right kind of skills that are required by the private sector. If you had to make a wish, what kind of partnerships do you think are most conducive between the public sector, between the private sector, excuse me, and academic institutions? What do you think those partnerships need to look like?
Can I talk in Japanese?
Go ahead.
大学との間では
When it comes to partnership with universities, I think joint research projects and a joint research are currently undertaken with various universities between Fujitsu and universities. And what is really necessary is that the private sector companies really receive the conclusions and outcome of this joint research, and that we utilize these outcomes, and that we utilize these outcomes and return it back to the university so that they can utilize that outcome and teach that to their students. I think that kind of exchange back and forth is an ideal way of collaboration.
Fantastic. I love the idea of joint research projects, and I think it's a beautiful place for us to close off this panel discussion. I'd like to extend a hearty thank you to all of our panelists who've done an incredible job in this panel discussion, and to all of you, our global audience, who has contributed so meaningfully in the chat with great questions and great comments. What I'd like for us to do now is take a 5-minute break. Let's stretch our legs. Let's come back. And it is 2 minutes past. So let me be a little bit more generous. Let me make it, it's about 3 minutes past, so make it 7 minutes. I'll see you at 10 past. And when we get together at 10 past, we're going to launch into our second and final panel discussion for the day. Thank you very much to the first panel. And please, let's make sure we're seeing you in 7 minutes. See you soon. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.